An Overseas Development Institute report urges better allocation of aid and better taxation in rich nations as UN poverty targets remain off course. Is nuclear power the solution to Africa's energy problems? And thousands from across the continent flock to Africa's first Comic-Con. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. A new report reveals that aid money urgently needs to be redirected to the poorest countries in order to reach the United Nations goal of ending extreme poverty by 2030. The Overseas Development Institute says that currently middle-income countries receive more aid than the 30 poorest nations. It warns at least 400 million people will still be living on less than $2 a day, despite governments pledging to eliminate all extreme poverty. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
In northern Ethiopia, irrigation channels have turned arid plains into fertile farmland. Agricultural production has quadrupled. Just 3 decades ago, this region was the epicenter of an extreme drought and famine that killed hundreds of thousands of people. The report from the ODI credits Ethiopia's so-called Productive Safety Net program, launched in 2005, with lifting 1.4 million people out of extreme poverty. It enabled Ethiopia to avoid another famine during severe droughts in 2010 and 2015. In contrast, neighbouring Uganda has recently seen extreme poverty levels rise, despite a rapid reduction in previous years.
And one of the reasons is because climate change is starting to have an impact in that country. Now, in Ethiopia, they've managed, with a lot of support, partly from the US, to have programs that support farmers when a sudden climate and a weather event happens. Uganda, they didn't. So when they had a drought, and that led to real increase in poverty. So it's a matter of having the right systems in place.
Ethiopia's program, the largest of any low-income country, pays beneficiaries to work on public works projects like irrigation, roads, schools and health clinics, helping to create long-term poverty relief. Such programs are vital in ending extreme poverty, according to the ODI report, which says there is an annual funding shortfall of $125 billion in the 3 core sectors of education, health and what it terms social protection transfers or welfare.
You need to do economic growth to do part of things, and then you also need investment in the social sectors. You need to have both sides of the coin to make this work. Donors are investing both in growth and in the social sectors, but they're not investing it in the right countries to near the extent that's needed. And in particular, in this report, we've identified 29 countries which can't afford the investment needed in the social sectors, and donors are not giving enough money to that group of countries.
The statistics are striking. Middle-income countries receive more aid than poorer countries, whose share of global aid has fallen over the past 6 years from 30% to 24%. The ODI says middle-income countries could afford to eradicate extreme poverty themselves with better tax systems and wiser spending.
So we're looking at countries like Indonesia, we're looking at countries like India, or even countries like China. There is a lot more potential to increase the taxation in those countries. Altogether, we think in middle-income countries they could raise another $2 trillion of finance. That would go to a long way to eliminating poverty in those countries.
As well as better aid allocation, the report says more donor nations need to reach the UN goal of allocating at least 0.7% of GDP to aid budgets. Without urgent action, the authors warn the goal of eliminating extreme poverty by 2030 will remain out of reach. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, at least 100 people are dead in Nigeria following massive flooding across the country. According to BBC, the country's National Emergency Management Agency says heavy rains caused the Niger River and Benue River to overflow, killing people and causing the displacement of thousands of others. The floods also destroyed farmlands. The Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency had raised the alert of flooding in some states after reporting that the Benue Benue and Niger rivers had almost reached levels that resulted in flooding in 2012, which led to loss of lives and destruction of property. Violence raged in Ethiopia the weekend. Police say at least 23 people were killed during attacks targeting minorities in the ethnic Oromo heartland near Addis Ababa. The violence deals a blow to new reformist Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's efforts for reconciliation. State-affiliated Fana Broadcasting said on Monday, Ethiopian police have now detained 200 people in connection with the violence. The violence escalated on Saturday, the day of a rally marking the return of Ethiopia of leaders of the exiled Oromo Liberation Front, which had waged a 4-decade insurgency for self-determination for Ethiopia's largest ethnic group. Prime Minister Abiy, the first Oromo leader in the ethnically diverse country's modern history, has pursued a reconciliation strategy since taking power in April. In this latest unrest, local residents say shops were looted and people were attacked by mobs of Oromo youth who stormed through streets targeting businesses and homes of ethnic minorities on Saturday after 2 days of sporadic attacks in the Oromia region, Burayu district, northwest of Addis Ababa. Now, for more perspective on what's happening in Ethiopia, Tedale Lema, editor-in-chief and founder of the Addis Standard magazine, joins me live via Skype from Frankfurt in Germany. Good evening, Tedale.
Good evening.
Now, we are kind of so surprised by the new developments because it was thought that Ethiopia is on the path of peace, especially after prisoners were released and the Prime Minister made so many announcements. What's going on?
Well, for those of us who are very closely following how the politics is transpiring and how this very fragile transitional period is happening, this did not come as a surprise. We are witnessing increasingly the government's inability to control its monopoly over violence. This is just one incident that happened in the weekend. We have seen a spate of other violence that happened in different parts of the country. Some of them are too gruesome to even retell again. So this is, we are in that transitional period where there is a huge perception that there is, coming out of this authoritarian regime, this perception that a government that is now quite busy in having some fluffy languages is considered absent by many. So that's the result of, partly the result of this.
But is this necessarily a result of government action, or this is more about violence being perpetrated by other groups, perhaps opposition groups?
Well, at this point, for me, it's very difficult to say who is perpetrating this violence. But one thing is very clear. There are several interest groups working in the country right now. It's, of course, the government always finds it very easy to point fingers outside, at others. But the government is also failing to look inside to see, who is most disenfranchised from this reform agenda that the Prime Minister himself is leading. So, we have to look at several directions
how do you explain this scenario? I mean, there was a rally welcoming people returning Oromo leaders, and then we have people from the Oromia community attacking other people in their region. So how do you explain that?
Well, Oromia as a region is the Achilles heel of Ethiopia's federalism experiment, let me put it like that. As a region which is predominantly, inhabited by the Oromo, but also it's as diverse as the rest of the country. So Oromia is one of the regions where you could see some of the weak links of the kind of federal system that Ethiopia is following today. But add to that, something that many people are not paying attention to is Oromia is a region as well that has been incapacitated. Its government, its regional government has been incapacitated by the two state of emergencies that have seen its security structure completely, let me put it this way, kindly, completely unable to control the violence that's flaring up in the region. So it's a region that is undergoing through a lot of reform. As a party that's leading the reform agenda is from that region, So there's a lot of things. The party, the OPDO, is doing a lot of purges from its rank and file leadership. So we have to look into what's happening to those people, thousands of them that have been being purged as part of this reform. What's happening? So it's multidimensional.
But up to now, if we do a kind of a check on developments there, what would be your assessment of Prime Minister Abiy? How is he doing?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is very much aware of what's happening right now. But the Prime Minister is also, I think, pretty occupied by the peace process that's happening with Eritrea. And also the party itself is going to be having its convention that has been postponed for the last 6 months already in the first week of October. So these parties are very occupied by what's going to happen in this convention, because this convention is going to determine whether or not the Prime Minister is going to have a vote of confidence from his party. So they are preoccupied by that, but they are very aware of what's happening.
We'll keep following up on this. Thank you very much, Zedale.
Thanks for having me, Vincent.
We appreciate your insight. That's Zedale Lema. She is the editor-in-chief and founder of the Addis Standard magazine, staying right there in Ethiopia. On a more positive note, Ethiopia and Eritrea have signed an agreement to bolster relations between the two countries, which had been at war for 20 years. The deal was signed on Sunday at a summit in Saudi Arabia. The details of the agreement, signed in the presence of Saudi Arabia's King Salman and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, were not immediately made clear. But Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir said in a tweet, the Jeddah peace agreement signed today before the custodian of the two holy mosques is a historic milestone for the peoples of Ethiopia and Eritrea and will contribute to strengthening security and stability in the region at large. Relations between the Horn of Africa neighbors have improved since Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced in June that Addis Ababa would finally honor a UN-brokered deal signed in 2000 to end a 2-year border war that killed an estimated 70,000 people. Well, nuclear power generation is becoming a goal in some nations across sub-Saharan Africa. While nuclear proponents tout benefits such as no carbon emissions, its critics bring up costs and safety problems. In this second of a two-part segment of Empowering Africa series, VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young sets forth the balance sheet on this controversial means of electrification.
With more than half of sub-Saharan Africa without permanent electrical service, nuclear power generation provides one option for turning on the lights. Some of the reasons why some countries choose nuclear power are set forth via Skype by Washington-based Center for Global Development energy researcher Abigail Sa.
Nuclear power has very low emissions and also has the capacity to produce a large baseload source of energy for African countries to support their growing populations.
Proponents also say that once a nuclear plant is built and fueled, it can run for years without needing to buy more fuel. But there are other costs, as spelled out via Skype by an energy analyst at the University of California, Berkeley, Daniel Kemen.
And then there's the problem of the waste management, which for every African country is going to be a service contract with Russia like Rosatom or China or France or somewhere else. And that adds a long-term expense that you don't get with renewables.
Nuclear plants and the radioactive waste they generate must be kept absolutely secure from intrusion and theft. Via Skype from the U.S. state of Colorado, Rocky Mountain Institute analyst Eric Wanless.
Providing that security costs a lot. And I think that regardless of the fundamental governance structures in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, again, it comes back to a cost.
Nations with nuclear reactors need to have and enforce a regulatory structure that closely oversees them. Questions are raised by an analyst at the California-based James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, Miles Pomper.
Look at the situation in Africa and a lot of other situations where the government has issues with corruption or other problems. How are you going to ensure that these regulators are sufficiently independent and technically savvy to prevent an accident?
Even developed nations with full security and regulatory structures suffer nuclear accidents, as seen at Chernobyl, Ukraine in 1986 and Fukushima, Japan in 2011. Doubts about Africa's ability to effectively respond are raised via Skype by Greenpeace energy analyst Melita Steele.
I don't think there's a single government in sub-Saharan Africa which would be able to effectively evacuate people who were affected by a nuclear catastrophe.
Despite the costs and hazards, some African countries still see nuclear power as an effective way to provide electricity and boost development. But others look to renewable sources, such as solar power, to bring lights to areas left in the dark. That's where we go next in Empowering Africa. Jeffrey Young, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Sub-Saharan Africa's effort to electrify is not just a matter of building big power plants and installing towers and wires. Solar power, feeding both into the main grid and powering remote areas, is getting favor. In Tuesday's segment of our Empowering Africa series, VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young looks at this approach to bringing light to the people. So be sure to watch Africa 54 on Tuesday. Now, Egyptian archaeologists draining water from a temple in the southern city of Aswan have uncovered a sandstone sphinx likely dating to the Ptolemaic era, according to the Antiquities Ministry statement on Sunday. The Sphinx, a mythical being with the head of a human and the body of a lion, was discovered at the Kom Ombo temple, where two engraved sandstone reliefs of King Ptolemy V had also recently been found. Ptolemaic rule spanned about 3 centuries until the Roman conquest in 30 BC. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Now, find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, a closer look at Africa's first ever Comic-Con. But first, a look at Monday's headlines.
In Rwanda, President Paul Kagame pardons more than 2,000 prisoners, including an opposition leader who has served 6 years of a 15-year jail term for conspiring to undermine the government. In Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia's prime minister and Eritrean president signed a peace agreement on Sunday in Jeddah. German Chancellor Angela Merkel arrives in Algeria for an official visit to discuss economic issues, migration, and counterterrorism. In South Africa, Hydrogen Power lights up Polano Secondary School as part of a plan to ease the country's dependence on fossil fuels and promote renewable energy. Finally, in Nigeria, Ivory Coast's Abdul Kader Kone was the winner of the first African Freestyle Football Championship held in Lagos.
Well, the woman who is accusing U.S. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct has come forward with an allegation. Christine Blasey Ford, a professor at Palo Alto University in California, told the Washington Post Sunday that she feared for her life during the attack. She says Kavanaugh and a friend cornered her in a bedroom where Kavanaugh threw her down on a bed and tried to remove her clothes. She also says both boys were stumbling drunk. Ford says the incident took place at a party in Maryland in the 1980s when both she and Kavanaugh were in high school. Kavanaugh has denied any wrongdoing. Democratic lawmakers have voiced doubt the allegation will derail the nomination. But Senator Dianne Feinstein, the senior Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, says Kavanaugh's nomination process should be put on hold until the FBI completes its investigation of that allegation. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is also calling for a delay in the confirmation process while Ford's allegations are investigated. The Washington Post reports that Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee indicated Sunday that they would move forward with a vote on Kavanaugh's confirmation this week. The Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to vote on Thursday. Kavanaugh, 53, is a federal appeals judge in Washington. President Donald Trump nominated him in July to replace retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy on the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, a new face of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation is dawning after President Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, pleaded guilty to 2 felony charges and agreed to cooperate with the probe of ties between Moscow and Trump's inner circle, possibly to influence the 2016 presidential contest. VOA's Michael Bowman has a report.
He was at the center of the campaign to elect Trump and privy to its confidential information, communications, records, and closed-door meetings. He was present at a 2016 meeting between Trump's son and a Russian lawyer who promised negative material on Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. Now, Paul Manafort has pledged to cooperate fully with the Mueller probe without an attorney present.
He did the right thing. He did the smart thing.
Ken Starr led the Whitewater investigation of former President Bill Clinton in the 1990s.
It is very likely that Paul Manafort has indicated through his counsel and directly that he can provide very helpful information, useful information, to get to the bottom of what Bob Mueller and his team have been charged to do.
By accepting the plea deal, Manafort faces sentences for only 2 of 8 financial crimes for which he was convicted last month and avoids a second trial. The deal can be terminated if Manafort holds back information or is caught lying.
Tough day for Mr. Manafort, but he's accepted responsibility.
Trump, who called Manafort a brave man after his conviction, on Sunday tweeted, quote, "The illegal Mueller witch hunt continues in search of a crime. There was never collusion with Russia." A White House statement noted that Manafort's crimes preceded the 2016 campaign and did not involve Trump. What might Mueller get from Manafort?
You only get a deal like this if you go up the chain. Who is up the chain from Paul Manafort, who was the chair of the Trump campaign? Don Jr., Roger Stone, the campaign itself, and perhaps ultimately the president.
Whatever is revealed, some see light at the end of a long tunnel.
This is a very helpful, I think, thing for the American people. I know the nation is so divided, but we should want the truth. Let's get the facts out. And I think Mueller is in a situation now to help us do that.
The special counsel investigation began in May of last year and could extend for many more months. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Hurricane Florence has weakened to a tropical storm, but continues to linger over the mid-Atlantic coast, worsening conditions in flooded areas. At least 14 people have died in the storm so far. Many towns and highways are underwater, and more than 800,000 homes have lost power. Now, officials warn the worst may still be to come as rainfall continues to inundate the region. Here's VOA's Zlati Sahok.
Florence was downgraded to a tropical depression on Sunday, but officials say it is now even more dangerous. In North Carolina, drenching rain extends to the central part of the state and into the mountains. Governor Roy Cooper said first responders have saved about 900 people from the water and urged citizens to cooperate.
Wherever you live in North Carolina, be alert for sudden flooding. Pay close attention to the weather warnings and be ready to head for safer ground if you're asked to evacuate. And that is going on now with some of our rivers. Never drive through flooded roads. Just a few inches of water can wash your car away.
Residents of New Bern, a riverfront city near the North Carolina coast, are among the worst hit by floods. Many have been evacuated, but some decided to ride out the storm.
That's the top half of our 1.5-story garage. I don't know where the rest of it is. That was the foundation right there.
While a part of this garage went missing, the storm brought in an unknown boat instead.
Don't know where the Miss Scarlet came from, the boat. It must have been anchored somewhere and just washed in during the storm.
This man witnessed the storm while visiting his mother in Jacksonville, North Carolina.
Oh, last night it was really horrible. Last night it sounded like you could hear plywood being ripped up and like the screeching sound of plywood being pried off of an old nail. You could hear lightning, tremendous amounts of lightning, thunder last night.
On Sunday, the storm was centered about 50 kilometers southwest of South Carolina's capital, Columbia, which is almost 250 kilometers away from the coast. Officials say the weakened storm is expected to dump another 25 centimeters of rain on central and western North Carolina in the coming days and cause catastrophic floods and the risk of landslides. From there, it is expected to move over the Ohio River Valley and toward the northeastern states on Monday and Tuesday. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Now, thousands of comic book and science fiction fans went head-to-head for the best costume at the first Comic-Con Africa in Johannesburg. Now, the event attracted comic, superhero, and anime fans from Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Nigeria. Comic-Con Africa showcased local characters like Kwezi and Captain South Africa. Comic-Con's arrival in Africa coincides with a big push by streaming services such as Netflix and Naspers Showmax to expand to capitalize on the continent's love of comics and Hollywood movies. Comic-Con started in 1970. It has since grown into a globally recognized set of fantasy celebrations, drawing over 130,000 fans to events in London, Moscow, Delhi, Sydney, and Dubai. Well, and finally, it wasn't so long ago when technology must-haves like floppy disks and CDs were carefully handled and lovingly placed in music players and computers. They were prized possessions, but today they are almost relics of the past. An exhibition of paintings made from discarded technologies and hyper-realistic life-size sculptures and are on the display at one of Britain's leading contemporary art galleries. The exhibits at London's Opera Gallery showcases the works of Korean sculptor Seo Young-deok alongside those by British artist Nick Gentry. Their work uses materials such as iron and cast-offs of technologies like CDs, floppy disks, and camera film negatives. And that's what's trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Now, be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That's Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. American English has many idioms that come from sports. This one comes from tennis.
The ball is in your court.
Jonathan, how did your date with my friend Caroline go?
It went great, but when I texted her, she didn't respond. So I guess it's over.
No, you can't give up.